Greetings, dear subscribers and casual listeners of my channel. The Marauders, James Potter, Sirius Black, Remus Lupin, and Peter Pettigrew, were 4 Hogwarts students whose bond was strong and whose mischief could easily rival that of the Weasley twins. The books, and even less so the films, give this quartet only the attention necessary to push the main plot forward. But the deeper we dive into the Marauders' story, the more questions arise. Some of them are so logically inconsistent that it's impossible not to notice. Let's unravel them together. Enjoy the video. Number 1. How did Fred and George not notice Pettigrew? Before Harry ever laid eyes on it, the Marauders' map was used by Fred and George Weasley. They were well aware of its magical properties. The map revealed everyone inside Hogwarts and was an excellent tool for pranks. Now think about this. The twins regularly used the map to keep tabs on the castle and, of course, on their younger brother, Ron. How did they never notice that someone named Peter Pettigrew, a man officially declared dead, was constantly shown next to Ron? Why weren't they surprised? Why didn't they ask, "Who's this Pettigrew guy always sleeping in our brother's dorm?" Number 2. Why didn't Lupin take his potion? One of the most intense scenes in The Prisoner of Azkaban is when Remus Lupin, a werewolf, suddenly loses control because he forgot to take the Wolfsbane potion. But Lupin is a grown man, a teacher, and has suffered from lycanthropy for years. Taking the potion should have been second nature by now. After all, lives were at stake, so how could he just forget? This convenient plot device allows Pettigrew to escape, throws the scene into chaos, and drives the narrative forward. But logically, it's a weak point. Lupin had always been careful. It seems out of character for him to make such a mistake. Number 3. How did they become animagi? The Marauders' most famous achievement is becoming animagi. James, Sirius, and Peter learned how to transform into animals to accompany Lupin during his werewolf transformations. A noble gesture, sure, but Animagus transformation is one of the most advanced magical feats. Throughout the entire 20th century, only 7 registered animagi were recorded by the Ministry. Yet the Marauders not only mastered it, they did so in secret, without teachers, and at a very young age. According to official descriptions, the first step alone requires holding a mandrake leaf in your mouth for an entire month. Full moon to full moon. You can't swallow it, take it out, or lose it, not even once. And that's just the beginning. After that come complex rituals, potions, and transfigurations. So how did 3 teenagers manage all of this without any teacher noticing? And why didn't anyone observe their strange behavior for months? Even Hermione, with all her brilliance and dedication, never attempted such a feat. Number 4. How did they create the Marauders' map? The Marauders' map is one of the most incredible magical inventions in the entire series. It doesn't just show hidden passages and secret rooms. It displays every person in the castle in real time, by name, with movements, even when they're under an invisibility cloak or polyjuice potion. How did they do it? Creating such an artifact requires deep knowledge of tracking charms, identity magic, and advanced protective enchantments. No student before or after has ever come close to replicating it. So where did 4 mischievous teenagers, who weren't even known as top students, learn all that? If they were truly this brilliant, why don't we hear about their magical achievements later in life? Or maybe someone helped them? That question has never been answered. And maybe that's part of the magic, not just wizardry, but the allure of mystery. Number 5. How did Dumbledore justify the Wamping Willow? Remus Lupin was able to attend Hogwarts thanks to the kindness of Professor Dumbledore. To protect others during his transformations, Dumbledore secretly had the Shrieking Shack built and connected it to the castle via a tunnel, the entrance to which was guarded by the Wamping Willow, a deadly, violent tree. That's all well and good, but here's a logical question. How did the headmaster explain the sudden appearance of a tree on school grounds that attacks anyone who comes near it? What did he tell the ministry, the school board, the students' parents? Why didn't anyone ask questions or investigate? At Hogwarts, students had died under far less mysterious circumstances, and yet there wasn't a single outcry. Number 6. Where did Sirius get a wand? After 12 years in Azkaban, Sirius Black escapes and almost immediately starts using magic. He transforms into his animagus form, evades capture, and here's the key detail. At some point he has a wand. How? In Azkaban, a prisoner's wand is confiscated. He couldn't have just strolled into Ollivanders. He was a fugitive, in hiding. And even if he somehow retrieved his old wand, why did it still work so well after all those years? Or was it someone else's wand? Then how did he achieve such perfect synchronization with it? This question was never answered. Number 7. Why didn't they suspect Pettigrew's betrayal? Peter Pettigrew sat beside them for 7 years. He laughed at their jokes, followed their lead, and turned into a rat just to keep up. James, Sirius, and Remus never saw the shadow behind his smile. They never questioned why Peter always stayed 2 steps behind, why he never took the lead, never stood up on his own. In The Prisoner of Azkaban, Sirius spits, "I as good as handed them to him. I suggested we use Pettigrew." The guilt in his voice is unbearable, because the truth is, Sirius never imagined Peter had the spine to betray them. The Marauders were confident, maybe too confident. They built the most advanced magical map in Hogwarts history, turned into animagi in secret, and mastered every corner of the castle. But their greatest flaw was thinking that loyalty came with friendship, that just because Peter was quiet and weak, he was harmless. But Pettigrew's weakness was exactly what Voldemort needed. Not strength, not brilliance, just fear. And fear was something Peter had in abundance, enough to sell out his friends and vanish into the walls. Number 8. How did Snape know Sectum Sempra before he invented it? In the Order of the Phoenix film, young Severus Snape raises his wand and hisses something sharp, his face twisted with rage. The spell shoots toward James Potter, slicing the air like a blade. It looks and sounds like Sectum Sempra, a curse we later learn Snape invented himself. But according to the Half-Blood Prince, Snape wrote that spell in his potions book during 6th year, so how could he be casting it years earlier as a teenager under the tree? It makes no sense. Either the filmmakers broke canon for dramatic effect, or they accidentally revealed something far more mysterious. Could Snape have crafted Sectum Sempra earlier than the book claims? Or was this just a generic hex meant to look familiar to fans? The book makes it clear. "For enemies," Snape scribbled beside the spell in ink. But the timeline is broken, unless, wild thought, it was never just a spell. Maybe Sectum Sempra came from a darker place inside Snape, something born not from study, but from pain. Something that existed long before it had a name. Number 9. Why did no one recognize Sirius in his dog form? The black dog haunted the edges of Hogwarts like a shadow, large, lean, with eyes that seemed too intelligent. Harry saw it again and again. In The Prisoner of Azkaban, he tells Ron and Hermione, "It was staring at me like it knew me." And yet not a single professor questioned it. Not Dumbledore, not McGonagall, and Animagus herself. A stray dog appeared near the school, lingered near the students, and no one investigated. Was Sirius Black truly that skilled? Had years in Azkaban sharpened his instincts until he moved like a creature, not a man? Or was it something else, something more unsettling? Perhaps wizards didn't see what they weren't looking for. Perhaps they underestimated him. After all, who would expect a madman, a supposed murderer, to be clever enough to master disguise, patience, and silence? The truth wandered right under their noses on 4 quiet paws. Number 10. Why did the Potters choose Pettigrew as secret keeper? The choice should have been obvious. James Potter trusted Sirius Black with everything. His secrets, his safety, his friendship. Everyone knew it. Voldemort knew it too. That's why Sirius suggested a switch. In The Prisoner of Azkaban, he tells Harry, We thought it was the perfect plan. Voldemort would go after me, would never dream they'd use a weak, talentless thing like Pettigrew. And so, with that one decision, everything unraveled. Peter Pettigrew became the secret keeper, a man known for hiding behind others, the kind who clung to power like a rat to scraps. James and Lily must have believed their trust protected them, that Peter's apparent weakness was a shield, but they misjudged. They never imagined that Pettigrew had already turned, that the fear inside him would outweigh loyalty, would drown the bond they had built for years at Hogwarts. When Sirius tells Lupin, "I as good as killed them," it isn't just guilt, it's the weight of strategy gone wrong. The Potters tried to outsmart a monster. They underestimated how far a coward would go to survive, and in doing so they gave their son's fate to a man who had already chosen the dark. Number 11. Why did Lupin appear so late in Harry's life? Remus Lupin should have been there. After all, he was James Potter's closest friend, the quiet one in the corner who watched, listened, and understood. When Lily and James died, when their son was left on a doorstep, where was Remus? He knew Petunia Dursley, he knew where Harry was, but he never wrote, never visited, never even stood across the street just to look. For a man who later told Harry, "You are more like your father than I have ever seen." The silence is deafening. Lupin's absence can't be fully explained by poverty or illness. He joined the Order of the Phoenix again. He fought, he taught, he risked his life. But not once in those 11 years did he question how Harry was treated. Not even when Dumbledore admitted, "I knew you would not be happy there," about the Dursleys. Was it guilt? Shame? The belief that he had no right? Or did Dumbledore himself forbid contact, sealing Harry's childhood under the illusion of safety? And when Lupin finally appears in Prisoner of Azkaban, it's as if no time has passed. He looks at Harry like he's seen a ghost. And maybe he has, not of James, but of all the years he didn't come. His voice trembles when he says, "You look so much like your father." But the question lingers in the air between them, unspoken, "Why didn't you come sooner?" And Remus Lupin never answers. Number 12. How did no teacher uncover the Marauders' secrets? They roamed the castle at night. 4 boys with a stolen map, a secret language, and magic far beyond their years. The Marauders, James, Sirius, Remus, and Peter, broke every rule in the book, and yet no one stopped them. Not Minerva McGonagall, who watched over Gryffindor like a hawk. Not Dumbledore, who claimed to know everything that happened under his roof. Even Severus Snape, obsessed with catching them in the act, never managed to prove what they truly were. They became unregistered animagi while still teenagers. That alone should have raised alarms. McGonagall herself, a registered animagus, had warned students how difficult and dangerous the transformation was. Yet the boys succeeded, undetected, despite the glowing presence of a werewolf on school grounds, the fact that Remus disappeared every full moon, and that a Wamping Willow was planted during his first year wasn't enough for anyone to ask real questions. Dumbledore knew, of course. He had to. In The Prisoner of Azkaban, Lupin admits, "Dumbledore gave me the job, even knowing I was a werewolf. He was even clever enough to arrange a safe place for me to transform." But if the headmaster knew that much, could he really have missed the rest? The map, the nighttime adventures, the illegal magic? Or was it his silent approval? Perhaps he turned a blind eye, just as he did with the Chamber of Secrets, just as he did with Tom Riddle. Maybe the real truth is more unsettling. Maybe the professors did notice, but underestimated the boys, saw pranks instead of patterns, saw charm instead of challenge. The Marauders, with all their recklessness, hid brilliance behind chaos. And in doing so, they pulled off the impossible. They fooled the smartest witches and wizards in Britain for 7 years straight. Number 13. Why was Peter Pettigrew sorted into Gryffindor? Peter Pettigrew was never the hero of any story, not even his own. While James Potter, Sirius Black, and Remus Lupin leapt headfirst into danger with wild grins and wands raised, Peter clung to their shadows. So why did the Sorting Hat place him in Gryffindor, the House of Courage? It's a question that haunts readers, especially after we see the coward he becomes, a traitor who sells his friends for safety, who kneels to Voldemort to spare his own skin. He didn't stand out in school, not in the way Sirius did, all sharp laughter and rebellion, or in the way James strutted through the corridors like a lion with lightning in his blood. Even Remus, quiet and thoughtful, carried the kind of bravery that meant surviving in silence. But Peter? He was the tag-along. And yet, as Sirius once said bitterly, he was always there, tagging along after us like a pet. Harry Potter and the prisoner of Azkaban. He didn't lead, he followed. Still, the hat must have seen something, some spark perhaps buried deep in the boy who looked up to lions and dreamed of roaring like them. It's possible Peter pleaded with the Sorting Hat. After all, Harry did. Not Slytherin, he whispered in Philosopher's Stone, and the hat listened. What if Peter begged the same, desperate not to be placed among cold ambition or forgotten in loyalty? What if he wanted to belong to something greater, something golden? And the hat, ancient and fallible in its own way, gave him that chance, gave him Gryffindor. A mistake? Maybe. Or maybe it believed courage isn't just loud. Maybe it thought Peter would find his moment. But he never did, not really. When the time came to stand, he fell. When he could have saved Harry in the cellar of Malfoy Manor, when he had that moment of mercy, of hesitation, his silver hand killed him. Magic judged him unworthy even of redemption. He failed Gryffindor, or maybe Gryffindor failed him, letting him hide among lions when he was always a rat. Number 14. Why did everyone tolerate James bullying Snape? It was a bright spring day at Hogwarts when the memory unfolded, a memory stored in the pensive and hidden in the quiet sorrow behind Severus Snape's sallow eyes. Harry Potter fell into the vision not knowing he would come out changed. What he saw was not a duel or a confrontation of equals. It was a public humiliation, stage-managed with cruelty and applauded by laughter. James Potter, tall and confident, hung Snape upside down in front of the entire courtyard, his robes flying over his head, exposing him to ridicule. Sirius Black reclined lazily beside him, tossing commentary like fuel onto a growing fire. And not far from them sat Remus Lupin, pretending to read while choosing to do nothing. It was a moment not of youthful mischief, but of deliberate, rehearsed bullying. "Snivelus," Sirius drawled in the memory, the nickname etched like a brand into school walls and student whispers. This was not the first time James and Sirius had done it, nor the last. It had become their entertainment. What shocked Harry, more than the spell, more than the laughter, was how normal it all seemed to everyone around. Lily Evans stood in horror, yes, but she was alone in her protest. No professor ran to stop it, no prefect intervened. This was not an accident. It was a pattern allowed to flourish. James Potter was celebrated. Quidditch captain, head boy, admired by many. None of these accolades seemed to account for the cruelty in that scene. It raised an unsettling question. Why was it allowed? Why did no one, not even the famously strict Professor McGonagall, step in to stop this campaign of harassment? She, who could silence a classroom with a single look, had evidently seen enough of these episodes. She must have known. Hogwarts was a castle full of watching eyes and whispering portraits, and yet silence. Dumbledore's silence is even more deafening. The headmaster, wise beyond most wizards who spoke so eloquently of love and sacrifice, allowed the bitter feud between Gryffindors and Slytherins to fester unchecked. There was no record of punishment, no indication that James or Sirius ever faced consequences. Snape, on the other hand, did. Detentions, verbal rebukes, and later the heavy burden of suspicion. How did Dumbledore justify this? Did he think the Marauders' behavior was a lesser evil, or worse, did he share the unspoken bias against Slytherin House? This leads us to an uncomfortable truth buried beneath the golden narrative of James Potter and his friends. The Marauders were adored by their peers, but what they did to Severus was not harmless fun. It was targeted, repeated, and often public. They were older than first years. They understood the consequences of their actions, and they were shielded by popularity and pedigree. James, in particular, walked through school with a kind of impunity only granted to the beloved. But his actions told another story, one of entitlement, aggression, and a disturbing hunger for dominance. The memory Harry saw was not an exception. Snape once muttered bitterly in the Order of the Phoenix, "Your father strut around the school and people worshipped him. He was every bit as arrogant as Sirius, and just as cruel when he wanted to be." This wasn't the rant of a bitter man, but a survivor speaking from experience. That cruelty wasn't hidden, it was celebrated. The lines between hero and tormentor had blurred long before Voldemort rose to power, and for all his faults, Severus remembered it all. Sirius Black's role cannot be minimized. He may have smiled with mischief, but his actions were often darkly calculated. Let us not forget the joke he once played by leading Snape toward the Wamping Willow, risking his death or worse. That was not immaturity, that was hatred. James saved Snape not out of mercy, but because he realized the prank had gone too far. Even then, it was damage control, not redemption. Sirius never truly expressed remorse. Years later, when Harry confronted him, he dismissed it with a shrug. "We were 15. That statement echoes hollow against the enormity of their behavior. 15 is not 7. At 15, students learn advanced magic, attend Hogsmeade weekends, and sit for OWLs. They are trusted with wands, exams, and moral decisions. It is not a child's age, it is the age when character begins to take root. And theirs had deep flaws. Remus Lupin's inaction is perhaps the most tragic. He knew better, he saw the cruelty, he had a moral compass, but he chose silence, fearing exclusion. In his own words, "I did nothing, I was a coward." And that cowardice cost Severus far more than pride. Lily Evans, who once tried to stop the bullying, was later driven away. Her friendship with Severus collapsed under the weight of humiliation and a single slur. But the slur was not born in a vacuum. It was cultivated in an atmosphere of relentless pressure, shame, and desperation. Snape's bitterness grew not only because of James's bullying, but because it was institutionalized. The school failed him. No adult ever extended protection. He was marked as an outsider, a Slytherin, and thus unworthy of sympathy. What does this say about Hogwarts? The school prided itself on 4 houses, yet fostered tribalism. Gryffindors and Slytherins were not just rivals, they were enemies. Teachers sometimes fed the divide with favoritism and sarcasm. When a Gryffindor hexed a Slytherin, it was brushed off. When a Slytherin retaliated, it became a scandal. Dumbledore's ideal of unity rang hollow within stone corridors laced with house prejudice. Number 15. Why didn't the Marauders use the map to fight Death Eaters? Of all the magical artifacts born from mischief, none has stirred as much quiet awe and whispered curiosity as the Marauders' map. Crafted by 4 students with a flair for rule-breaking and a staggering command of advanced magic, the map is no less than a cartographic miracle. It reveals every hallway and hidden chamber within Hogwarts, tracking not just people's locations, but their names, their movements, even their idleness. And yet, during the darkest decade of the wizarding world, a time when Voldemort's Death Eaters moved through Britain like living shadows, this powerful magical tool was never turned outward, never used as a weapon in the war. The Marauders never thought to adapt it, or perhaps they tried and failed. This silence, this omission, is where the uncomfortable question begins to bloom. James Potter, Sirius Black, Remus Lupin, and Peter Pettigrew created something that rivaled the greatest magical feats of the time. The map's very existence is a contradiction to the idea that they were merely pranksters. The map reads like a sentient being whispering secrets, responding to commands, and erasing itself with elegance. "I solemnly swear that I am up to no good," the user says. And suddenly, Hogwarts unfurls across the parchment, alive with names in tiny script. When the phrase is reversed, mischief managed, it vanishes again. And yet, this wondrous tool, arguably the most advanced bit of surveillance magic created by students, remained confined to one castle. Why? The years between 1977 and 1981 were not years of peace. These were the final school years of the Marauders and the rise of Voldemort in full force. People were disappearing, families slaughtered, and James, Sirius, and Remus joined the Order of the Phoenix, the underground resistance led by Dumbledore himself. The Order was desperate for every tactical advantage. They needed eyes in the Ministry, ears in Nocturne Alley, and knowledge of who was loyal and who was lying. How could it be that none of the Marauders thought to use their masterpiece in this war? We must consider one potential reason: technical limitations. The Marauders map works in Hogwarts because the Marauders bound their magic to its specific geography. The magic responds to the boundaries, the enchantments, the structure of Hogwarts itself. Hogwarts is, as we know from Hermione's research, a place protected by ancient spells, some so complex that not even Albus Dumbledore could unravel them. The Marauders, geniuses though they were, had crafted a map that used these enchantments rather than fought them. The castle's magic became a part of the map's intelligence. Trying to replicate that kind of spellwork elsewhere may have proven impossible. Still, they had time. Sirius and James in particular, both unemployed and devoted to the Order's mission, had months to experiment. They knew Voldemort's followers walked freely in Wizarding London, perhaps even in the Department of Mysteries. Why not attempt to build a new version of the map, even if it worked only in Grimmauld Place or Diagon Alley? Why wasn't that knowledge sought, shared, spread? Why didn't Dumbledore, who surely knew of the map, push them to develop it further? One scene casts this into sharper relief. In Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, when Harry's name appears in the goblet, Dumbledore is furious. He needs information fast. And yet he never asks to see the map. He never even references it. It's as though the artifact exists in a bubble outside of practical use. Is it possible that Dumbledore knew the map's magic was unstable, or perhaps, far worse, he distrusted its creators? We cannot ignore Peter Pettigrew, the fourth name on that map, the traitor. The rat who betrayed them all, as Sirius put it. The same man who watched his friends craft a device to track movement and later used his knowledge of it to avoid detection. When the Marauders' map fell into Harry's hands, it listed Peter Pettigrew walking the halls of Hogwarts as Wormtail. That alone suggests that the map does not lie, so if Peter knew of it and knew how it worked, wouldn't he have warned Voldemort? Wouldn't Voldemort have sought to destroy it? Perhaps that's the answer. Perhaps the map wasn't just unusable in battle, it was dangerous. If Voldemort had ever gained access to it, he could have used it to invade the only safe place left, Hogwarts. Perhaps James and Sirius in their wisdom decided the artifact was better kept hidden than weaponized, its potential too great, its exposure too risky. And yet, that raises another uncomfortable truth: they trusted Harry with it. They didn't pass it to the Order, they didn't destroy it. They left it in the clutches of Filch, of all people, and only through Fred and George did it make its way to Harry. If it had been kept locked in Grimmauld Place, or destroyed before James and Lily's deaths, it would have been erased from magical history. But no, the Marauders' map survived, as if waiting. And still, Remus Lupin, who taught at Hogwarts and rediscovered the map in Prisoner of Azkaban, didn't tell Dumbledore. He confiscated it from Harry but returned it later without concern. "It is a very useful map," Lupin admitted, "and I have no doubt James would have wanted you to have it." He doesn't even hesitate. No fear of Voldemort, no warning. Why such ease? Has the map become just another relic of their youth in his mind, something emotionally warm but practically useless? But that cannot be. Remus saw the map identify Peter Pettigrew. He saw what it could do, and still he let Harry use it like a toy. Did the map's whimsical nature blind them to its potential? Were the Marauders so steeped in nostalgia that they could no longer see it as a weapon? Or were they, even unconsciously, afraid of what it might show? Number 16. Why didn't Sirius tell Harry the truth earlier? When Sirius Black escaped from Azkaban, the entire wizarding world held its breath. The Daily Prophet plastered his gaunt, wild-eyed face on every street corner and breakfast table in Britain. Everyone knew his name. Sirius Black, the traitor, the murderer, the man who had supposedly handed over James and Lily Potter to Voldemort. But none knew the truth, not even Harry. And the haunting question remains, why didn't Sirius find a way to tell Harry before their chance meeting in the Shrieking Shack? Why did he allow the boy to believe a lie for so long? Sirius Black was not an ordinary fugitive. He was a marauder, the mastermind behind some of the most complex mischief Hogwarts had ever known. Alongside James Potter, Remus Lupin, and Peter Pettigrew, Sirius helped create the Marauders' map, an enchanted document that displayed not only the layout of Hogwarts but also the precise movements of everyone within its walls. That level of magical ingenuity cannot be dismissed. This was a man who had once transformed into a giant black dog, Padfoot, to keep company with a werewolf friend. He was bold, cunning and resourceful, and he broke out of Azkaban without a wand. That kind of determination suggests that if Sirius had truly wanted to contact Harry, he could have found a way. Yet when we open The Prisoner of Azkaban, Harry knows nothing of Sirius Black beyond the image the Ministry and media have painted. He doesn't know that Sirius is his godfather. He doesn't know that Sirius loved his parents more than life itself. And he certainly doesn't know that Sirius believes Peter Pettigrew, the true traitor, is alive and hiding as Ron's rat Scabbers. Harry is left in the dark, filled with dread, believing that a madman is hunting him. All this time, Sirius watches from the shadows. The most damning detail is this: Sirius had 13 years to think in Azkaban, 13 years to plan, to reflect, to plot every possible course of action. The very moment he saw Peter Pettigrew in that photo from the Weasleys' trip to Egypt, he acted. He escaped Azkaban by transforming into his animagus form, a lean black dog, and slipping through the prison bars. He crossed the sea in that form. He tracked the Hogwarts Express. He followed Harry. He even slashed the fat lady's portrait to get into Gryffindor Tower. Sirius Black was not paralyzed by fear or indecision. He was moving, hunting, surviving. So why didn't he send a message? Let's consider the logistics. Could Sirius have sent a letter? Certainly, the Ministry was watching the mail to Privet Drive, but Sirius knew people, old friends, trusted allies. Remus Lupin was alive and teaching at Hogwarts. Arabella Figg, a squib, and a member of the Order of the Phoenix lived just down the street from the Dursleys. Even Mundungus Fletcher, unreliable as he was, might have been persuaded to carry a message. These were not strangers. They were part of the old network, the people who fought Voldemort alongside James and Lily. If anyone could have helped, it was them. Moreover, Sirius had access to his animagus form. As Padfoot, he could have appeared to Harry in a non-threatening way. He could have left notes, clues, even simple instructions. Harry was smart and observant. He had solved the mystery of the Sorcerer's Stone in his first year and fought a basilisk in his second. Surely, with a bit of guidance, he could have been led to the truth. Instead, Harry is blindsided, cornered, and nearly kills Sirius himself under a mistaken belief. In the Shrieking Shack, when the truth finally erupts, it's raw and emotional. Sirius, gaunt and exhausted, is not only trying to explain but to plead. "I did not kill your father, Harry," he cries. The desperation in his voice is unmistakable. He has lived 13 years with the knowledge that the world blames him. And yet this is the first moment he offers the full truth. Why wait so long? Why let the boy suffer? The answer may lie uncomfortably in Sirius's own character. He was brave, loyal, and passionate, but he was also reckless, impulsive, and wounded. This is the same man who once sent Severus Snape into the Shrieking Shack as a teenager, fully aware that Remus would be there in his werewolf form. It was James who had to save Snape at the last moment. Sirius didn't always think things through. He acted on emotion. His flight from Azkaban was driven by fury, not strategy. He wanted revenge on Pettigrew more than he wanted resolution. And that may be the cruel truth. Even Dumbledore, a man known for his insight, expresses concern over Sirius's mindset. When speaking with Snape in Order of the Phoenix, he notes that Sirius is restless and brooding. He's not fully healed from Azkaban, nor from the deaths of his best friends. He is a man suspended in grief, still living in the shadows of a war long over. And when he finally meets Harry, he does not offer comfort. He offers vengeance. He tells Harry they can kill Pettigrew together. For a 13-year-old boy, this is not what a godfather should say. It's what a broken man would say. There's also the issue of trust. Sirius may not have trusted anyone. After all, he once believed Remus was the traitor, not Peter. He may have assumed that Dumbledore would not believe him, or worse, hand him back to the Ministry. He knew the Ministry would never listen. He had no proof. His animagus form was unregistered. Peter was a rat, and his own past was tarnished by his impulsive nature and family name. The Black family was infamous, and Sirius had never shaken free of that stigma. In the wizarding world, perception matters, and Sirius was perceived as mad. But even so, the question lingers, shouldn't he have tried? A simple note, unsigned, a cryptic warning, anything to plant doubt in Harry's mind before fear took over. Harry spent nearly an entire year fearing that Sirius Black would kill him. Mrs. Weasley told him, "He's after you." Ron said he'd heard Sirius was the reason your parents are dead. And Harry believed them. His trust in adults already fragile was further eroded. Sirius let that happen. Number 17. Why didn't the Marauders leave instructions for the map? In the shadowed corridors of Hogwarts, the Marauders had once reigned as mischievous kings: James Potter, Sirius Black, Remus Lupin, and Peter Pettigrew. 4 boys bound by secrets, animagus transformations, and an enchanted map that bore silent witness to every footstep. Their friendship was legend, their cunning unrivaled. Yet when war broke out and the Order of the Phoenix cried for help, their brilliance was strangely underutilized. While James and Sirius are remembered for their valor, Remus fades into the margins, and Peter, well, history does not treat traitors kindly, but the question lingers. Why didn't Dumbledore unleash the full might of the Marauders during the First Wizarding War? Dumbledore was a master of chess, not just the board, but in life. He moved pieces with foresight, yet the Marauders were kept curiously close to the edge of his plans. Sirius Black, despite his raw talent and dueling prowess, was often used for brute assignments, not the subversive tactics he had perfected as a teenager. James, bold and powerful, followed suit, but one would expect Dumbledore to have crafted operations to exploit the Marauders' greatest strength, their ability to go unnoticed. The very essence of their legacy was stealth and misdirection. Why weren't they his spies? Why weren't they infiltrating Death Eater circles or ambushing patrols with the cunning they had shown every night for 7 years? Remus Lupin, the werewolf with a scholar's mind, was a natural strategist. He had spent his life analyzing risk, planning movement around his own transformations, and guiding his friends through darkness, both literal and moral. Yet the books tell us little of his involvement. He was not a duelist like James, nor a wild card like Sirius, but his mind should have been irreplaceable. Dumbledore knew Remus better than most. He had, after all, taken the risk of letting a werewolf into Hogwarts. He had orchestrated the Wamping Willow and the Shrieking Shack to accommodate the boy's needs. And yet, when the time came to fight Voldemort, Remus was not a visible force within the Order. Was this caution, or a deliberate act of exclusion? Peter Pettigrew's silence during this era is even more disturbing. It's easy to paint him as the weak link in hindsight, but he had kept up with the other three in every prank, every risky endeavor. He had learned to become an animagus, a feat most adult wizards wouldn't dare attempt. It was this transformation that made the Marauders so formidable, and Peter was a part of it. And yet, there is no mention of Dumbledore sending Peter on missions, no account of his heroism. What did Dumbledore see or fail to see in Peter Pettigrew? Was it mere oversight, or a quiet mistrust that kept Peter on the periphery? The very talents that had defined the Marauders were ignored by the man who should have seen them most clearly. Dumbledore prized loyalty, ingenuity, and moral resilience. The Marauders had displayed all three, albeit with schoolboy cruelty at times, but Dumbledore himself had once befriended Gellert Grindelwald, had once believed in power above ethics. He knew how youth could fumble toward darkness, and perhaps that made him cautious. Perhaps the pranks and bullying at Hogwarts had planted a seed of doubt in his mind. Did he wonder if these boys would mature into soldiers or fracture under pressure? Even among the Marauders, that fracture was visible. Sirius mistrusted Remus, believing him capable of betrayal. "He's the spy, not me," Sirius had roared during the confrontation that led to his imprisonment. And yet, if Dumbledore had kept Sirius and Remus together on missions, forced them to work in tandem, might that suspicion have never taken root? Trust is not just built, it's tested, refined. But they were separated. Dumbledore gave them pieces of the war, not its center. Remus wandered through the fringes. Sirius was kept in the fight, but out of the loop. And Peter went unnoticed. The Fidelius charm that protected the Potters stands as perhaps the greatest irony. Sirius, the obvious choice, was passed over in favor of Peter, a decision that ultimately destroyed everything. Dumbledore was not consulted, or if he was, he did not override the decision. And this is where we must ask, did the Marauders' bond obscure the truth from Dumbledore? Or did he, in his aloofness, fail to see who Peter really was? The betrayal was not just of James and Lily, it was of Dumbledore's own war effort. Yet Peter had slipped past the radar because no one, not even the greatest wizard of the age, had seen him for what he was becoming. James Potter, brave to the end, died protecting his family. He faced Voldemort unarmed, buying Lily and Harry a few precious seconds. This we know. But what might James have accomplished had he been sent to negotiate with rogue factions or lead resistance cells in enemy territory? His charisma was legendary. Slughorn once said he had always been the talent in the room. Dumbledore used him as a warrior, but never as a leader of men. It was a wasted opportunity, not just for James, but for the Order as a whole. Sirius Black's story is one of fury caged. After the Potter's death, he was cast into Azkaban without trial, a victim of his own loyalty. "I would have died rather than betray them," he later told Harry. And yet Dumbledore, always so careful, did not advocate for him, did not probe deeper. Why? If Dumbledore had placed more trust in Sirius's mind rather than merely his wand, might things have gone differently? The Marauders had been so close, and yet by the end of the First War, they were shattered. Did Dumbledore's distance contribute to that fall? There is a sense that Dumbledore always knew more than he let on. He could have easily identified Peter as a suspect. The signs were there, but perhaps his gaze was fixed elsewhere. on prophecies and horcruxes and chess pieces still moving. In choosing to orchestrate from above, he missed what was unraveling beneath, a brotherhood collapsing. The Marauders had formed a unit, dangerous, unpredictable, but effective. By splitting them apart, Dumbledore may have diffused their potential and amplified their weaknesses. Remus Lupin later told Harry that the Marauders had been the best times of his life. Yet during the war, those friendships were tested and twisted. Remus was sent into the underground werewolf community, a logical placement, given his condition. But it was also isolating. It removed him from his friends and placed him in a hostile environment with no support. Dumbledore hoped I might be able to persuade some of them, Remus said quietly. But he hadn't. Instead, he returned alone, more broken than before. Dumbledore had sent him into darkness without a lifeline. The transformation into animagi was not just mischief, it was mastery. Few students could have achieved it, let alone keep it secret for years. That sort of ingenuity could have rewritten the rules of espionage during the war. Picture this: Sirius, in dog form, slipping past enemy lines; Peter, a rat in the Malfoy Manor's drawing room; James, a stag that no one suspects is listening. They could have been Dumbledore's eyes and ears. Instead, they were fragmented. The map they had created, a tool of absolute surveillance, gathered dust at Hogwarts, unutilized. Trust is the thread that binds this tapestry of missteps. Dumbledore did not fully trust the Marauders, or if he did, he trusted the wrong aspects of them. He saw James and Sirius as fighters, Remus as a liability, Peter as an afterthought. He did not see them as a coordinated force, and yet as children they had achieved feats that rivaled the Marauders' map in brilliance. The real tragedy is not that they were underused, but that they were misread. Could Dumbledore have prevented the betrayals? It's impossible to say, but he might have tempered them. A more cohesive use of the Marauders might have sustained their trust in one another. When Sirius suspected Remus, when Remus was exiled to the werewolves, when Peter was left in the margins, all of it created cracks. And in those cracks, Voldemort's influence grew. The Marauders were not just soldiers, they were a unit. Dumbledore, master of alliances, should have seen that. The secrecy around the Order's operations during the First War was legendary, but secrecy also means isolation, and the Marauders thrived in collaboration. In separating them, Dumbledore may have made them vulnerable. Alone, Peter cracked. Remus withdrew. Sirius lost control. Only James stayed centered. He was the first to die. It is a cruel irony that the one Marauder who remained stable was the one the war consumed first. In Harry's third year, when the truth of the betrayal finally surfaced, Dumbledore listened. He allowed Remus and Sirius to speak, but it was too late. The damage had been done over a decade earlier. The question is not whether Dumbledore could have foreseen Peter's betrayal, but why he allowed a group so powerful, so loyal, to splinter. Was it arrogance? Was it a belief that youth could not grasp the stakes of war? Perhaps the greatest oversight was the failure to give the Marauders purpose. They had been given missions, yes, minuta, but not unity, not a shared goal. They had made magic together at school, not just spells, but maps, bonds, transformations. In war they should have been given the same, a mission, a purpose, a reason to trust each other again. Instead, they were turned into separate agents, each adrift, and Voldemort, who thrived on division, exploited that to perfection. There is no record of Dumbledore ever speaking to Harry about the Marauders as a group. He speaks of James, of Sirius, of Remus, but not of what they once were together. That silence is telling. Perhaps even he could not face what had been lost. Or perhaps in that quiet omission lies the answer. The Marauders were not forgotten. They were misunderstood, used as individual pieces instead of the powerful ensemble they once were. In the end, it is not enough to say the Marauders were underused. They were misunderstood, scattered, and ultimately undone, not just by Voldemort, but by choices made within their own ranks and by the man who led them. Dumbledore, with all his wisdom, failed to see that brilliance unshaped is just as dangerous as darkness. The Marauders could have been his greatest weapon. Instead, they became his greatest regret. Number 18. Why didn't anyone realize Scabbers was human? Of all the mysteries buried beneath the polished floors of Hogwarts, one has remained remarkably undisturbed, as if the wizarding world silently agreed not to question it. For nearly 12 years, a man lived as a rat, nestled in the cozy warmth of a boy's bed, dining on leftover toast and scuttling along the corridors of the magical world unnoticed. Peter Pettigrew, traitor, murderer, and animagus, found perfect cover in the most ridiculous form imaginable, a family pet. The Marauders, pranksters of legendary cunning, had once vowed loyalty and shared secrets deeper than any friendship. Yet none of them, not even the most brilliant minds at Hogwarts, saw through the disguise of a coward hiding in plain sight. Why? Peter's transformation into Scabbers should have raised immediate alarms. Magical rats do not live for 12 years. In Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, Ron himself casually mentions, "I've had him for ages, he was my brother Percy's before that, and I've got him since I was at Hogwarts." That put Scabbers in the Weasley household for over a decade, far beyond the expected lifespan of any ordinary rodent. It wasn't just an anomaly, it was a red flag with fireworks. Yet even Molly Weasley, who adored her children and had seen her fair share of magical oddities, never paused to question the unnatural longevity of a rat that had been passed down like an heirloom. One must also consider the environment in which Scabbers was hiding. Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry was not just an educational institution, it was a sanctuary for some of the most powerful and perceptive witches and wizards of the age. Professor McGonagall, known for her stern demeanour and unparalleled expertise in transfiguration, had spent decades teaching students to recognize the subtle nuances of magical transformation. How could she, an animagus herself, fail to notice that a rat showed behaviour far beyond its nature? Scabbers not only listened to human conversations, he reacted to them, made choices, exhibited fear at moments that would mean nothing to a real animal. Pettigrew's fear was particularly evident during the return of Sirius Black. When news of Black's escape from Azkaban reached the magical world, Scabbers began to wither away, losing weight and growing skittish. Crookshanks, Hermione's cat, attacked him repeatedly, drawn not by the scent of a rat, but by something deeper, something magical. In Prisoner of Azkaban, Crookshanks is described as being unusually intelligent, and he persistently pursued Scabbers with a focus no ordinary pet would have. Still, no one asked the most obvious question: why was a cat so obsessed with an aging rat? Then there's Fred and George Weasley, two of the most perceptive pranksters to ever stroll through Hogwarts' hallowed halls. The twins, always alert to the unusual and the unexplained, shared a dormitory with Ron for years. They enchanted objects, experimented with magical inventions, and surely noticed their brother's curiously long-lived pet. How could two boys, attuned to the subtle frequencies of magical oddity, never wonder why a rat was outliving its biology by such a margin? Even among all their chaos, the twins respected magical logic, and this rat defied it. Dumbledore's oversight is perhaps the most baffling of all. A man known for seeing into the soul of others, Albus Dumbledore had an uncanny ability to understand what others could not. He had faced Grindelwald, deciphered the Hallows, and defeated dark forces more ancient than Voldemort. Yet he allowed Peter Pettigrew, the secret keeper who betrayed the Potters, to exist within his walls, scampering under tables and resting in the pockets of robes. When Remus Lupin later discovered the truth, he said, "I thought he had died. I thought Sirius had killed him." As if it had never occurred to him that Peter might use the very skill they once all mastered to vanish into another form. The Marauders, once inseparable, had designed the Marauders map to show every living soul within Hogwarts. every name, every movement, every secret passage. And yet Scabbers never appeared as Peter Pettigrew. In Prisoner of Azkaban, when Fred and George gift the map to Harry, they joke, "We've never managed to get into as much trouble as we might have liked with it." But later, when Harry uses the map to sneak into Hogsmeade, he spots a name that shouldn't be there, Peter Pettigrew. The map always showed the true identity, not the appearance. That begs a brutal question. Did no one ever look closely enough? Snape, ever suspicious and always watching, especially when it concerned anything related to the Marauders, never noticed either. He loathed Sirius, distrusted Remus, and resented James even from the grave. Snape had every reason to dig through their pasts to uncover any piece of filth that might still be clinging to their legacy. When he confronted Lupin and later Sirius in the Shrieking Shack, he was filled with rage, but not suspicion. The idea that Pettigrew could have faked his death while possessing the exact magical knowledge to do so never crossed his mind. Peter, of course, was the weakest among them, but also the most resourceful in his cowardice. His survival instinct eclipsed any morality he once had. He didn't possess the bravery of James, the cunning of Sirius, or the intellect of Remus. But he was desperate. That desperation drove him to perform a feat so perfect in its simplicity it became invisible. Becoming a rat, a servant creature, beneath suspicion, he used the magical world's tendency to underestimate the small and insignificant. The Ministry, Dumbledore, the professors, the Weasleys, they all saw what they expected to see, a harmless, aging pet. And yet the magical world is filled with tools to expose such deception. The simplest Revelio charm might have worked, or Hominum Revelio, a spell used to detect the presence of humans. During the hunt for Death Eaters, Auras used this very spell to locate those in hiding. The irony is that if someone had pointed a wand at Ron's pocket and muttered that incantation, Peter's secret would have crumbled in an instant. But no one ever suspected a child's pet of being anything more than a source of fleas. The truth is that Pettigrew's success was built on a gamble that people would see a rat and never look deeper. He relied on the apathy of others, on their inability to question the familiar. And the tragedy of it all is that this gamble worked for 12 uninterrupted years. He watched the world change, Voldemort fall, and begin to rise again, all from the shadows of Ron's room. He saw Arthur Weasley's private notes, heard Order of the Phoenix secrets whispered across kitchen tables, and passed unnoticed through platform barriers and magical barriers alike. Remus Lupin, perhaps the one man who might have known, never looked. Haunted by his own demons and teaching under the strain of secrecy, Remus had little reason to examine a boy's rat. But how strange that a man so close to Peter, who had once spent nights running through the Forbidden Forest with him, didn't feel a flicker of recognition. Pettigrew's scent, his magical aura, some trace should have remained. Were the bonds of the past truly so forgotten that even a former brother-in-arms could not sense the familiar soul hiding under fur? In the final moments of Pettigrew's exposure, Sirius Black, haggard, desperate, and robbed of a decade, explodes in fury. "You should have died, rather than betray your friends as we would have done for you," he cries. There is heartbreak in this, but also a veiled truth. Sirius, who had been blamed for crimes he never committed, had suspected something. He had seen the betrayal in Peter's eyes long before anyone else did, but even he had not guessed the rat was real. Even he, driven by vengeance, took years to reach the final, horrible realization. The entire saga of Scabbers is one of magical blindness, a kind of collective spell that cloaked reality in routine. Apathy became the most powerful magic of all. Wizards and witches who prided themselves on insight and intelligence were fooled by their own assumptions. Pettigrew, whose very name implies something small and pitiful, became a symbol of how evil can thrive not in grand schemes but in dusty corners, behind cupboard doors and under children's beds. In a world filled with talking portraits, enchanted mirrors, and objects imbued with sentience, a single man disguised as a rat still managed to outwit the system. He rode in train compartments with heroes, watched as legends were born, and stayed silent. It was not magic that hid him, it was the refusal of others to question what seemed too strange to question. Pettigrew became the magical equivalent of an urban legend, too mundane to investigate, too absurd to suspect. Perhaps the Marauders never wanted to ask the question. Perhaps they feared the answer. For what is more painful than realizing the friend you mourned is not dead, but hiding in disgrace? The cowardice that kept Peter alive also served as a mirror to the failures of others, to their blindness, their trust, and their unwillingness to confront the impossible. He was a rat, yes, but also a ghost, a memory, a lie wrapped in fur and silence. Peter's success as Scabbers is less a tale of magical skill and more a lesson in perception. The wizarding world is often dazzled by spectacle, flying brooms, duels, prophecies, but it is blind to the banal. Pettigrew thrived because he was ordinary. His disguise was not grandiose but small. In the end, it wasn't powerful spells that protected him. It was something far more dangerous. He knew that no one ever looks closely at a rat, and no one did. Not even those who should have known better. Number 19, why didn't Sirius explain himself to Ron and Hermione right away? Of all the many moments that define the unpredictability of Sirius Black, none is more baffling than the one that unfolds in the Shrieking Shack during Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban. He's cornered 3 terrified teenagers, one of whom is his godson, and instead of immediately revealing his innocence, Sirius chooses silence, menace, and mystery. He grips a knife, he growls, his eyes shine with madness, and though the truth trembles on the edge of his lips, it never falls until chaos has taken its full turn. Why didn't Sirius simply explain? When Harry first sees Sirius in the shack, Sirius does not utter the words that could have changed everything. Peter Pettigrew is alive. Those 5 words would have been enough to stop Hermione from raising her wand. They would have spared Ron the pain of confusion and fear. Instead, Sirius begins with vague threats and unsettling intensity, saying, "I've waited 12 years," his face gaunt, with sunken eyes and yellowing teeth. The portrait of a man broken by time, yes, but also of a man who appears dangerous, even mad. His silence breeds suspicion. The Marauder the fans know and love chooses mystery over clarity. Why? The argument often offered is that Azkaban had unhinged him, but even in his madness, Sirius shows clarity. He escapes prison with a plan. He transforms into his animagus form, navigates the dangers of the outside world, and tracks down Pettigrew, now masquerading as Scabbers. He orchestrates an entry into Hogwarts. He manipulates the fat lady's portrait. All of this demonstrates presence of mind. A broken man could not do this. So why does the same man who has outwitted Dementors and a school of magic fail to use words in the Shrieking Shack? Let's recall the moment when Sirius lunges at Ron, demanding the rat. There is no attempt to de-escalate, no sign of the calm godfather figure he becomes later. He lunges with a knife. Harry tackles him to the ground. Sirius is unrepentant. His obsession with Peter Pettigrew clouds his behavior, but it also exposes a choice. He prioritizes revenge over explanation. He could have said, "That rat is a traitor. That rat is Peter Pettigrew." But he doesn't. The children are left to defend themselves from what they think is a murderer. It becomes a life-or-death game of cat and mouse. The Marauders, James Potter, Sirius Black, Remus Lupin, and Peter Pettigrew, were known for their secrets: animagi, the Marauders' map, code names, hidden rooms. It's ironic, then, that the one moment Sirius needed transparency, he chose secrecy. Was it an echo of old habits? Did the Marauders become so used to riddles that direct speech felt unnatural? Or was it something darker, a subconscious desire to play out the scene in his head, to reclaim power through performance, to see Pettigrew squirm not only physically, but theatrically? It's hard not to see this as a narrative trick. The tension in the Shrieking Shack is palpable, but that tension only exists because Sirius does not explain himself. If he had, there would be no dramatic reveal, no jaw-dropping transformation of Scabbers into Peter. The plot demanded confusion, and so Sirius obliged. But in-universe it feels like a betrayal of logic. The Sirius who risked everything to protect Harry from the truth about his parents' betrayal now risks everything again, but this time through omission. Even Lupin, when he enters the shack, doesn't instantly tell the children the truth. He speaks cryptically. He mentions the map. He examines Ron's rat. He says, "You've been hiding him for 12 years. But he doesn't clarify. This behavior suggests a shared tendency among the Marauders to withhold, to dance around truth until the final moment. It feels theatrical, almost like a ritual, a dramatic flourish reserved for those who know how secrets work. But Ron and Hermione didn't grow up among secrets. Their fear is real, their confusion is real, and Sirius does little to calm it. What would have changed had Sirius simply explained? Imagine a scenario where he says, "Harry, I am not your enemy. That rat is Peter Pettigrew, the real traitor." With magic, perhaps the truth could have been extracted. With time, perhaps Dumbledore could have intervened. But Sirius doesn't seek help. He seeks revenge. He is no longer a strategist. He is an avenger. His soul may have survived Azkaban, but his sense of perspective has not. The knife Sirius carries becomes a symbol. It is not just a weapon. It is the embodiment of everything he cannot say. It slices through the tension but fails to cut through misunderstanding. It is the wrong tool for the job. Words could have been his salvation. Instead, he relies on primal instincts, on fear, on dominance. Even when cornered, Sirius plays the predator. His face, described as a mask of madness, does not reflect innocence, it reflects obsession. And obsession is rarely logical. When Hermione accuses Sirius of betrayal, he does not deny it. He waits, he looks, he breathes. The silence speaks more than he does. Even Harry, who wants to hate Sirius, finds himself confused. "Why didn't you tell anyone?" he asks. Sirius's answer, "Because I didn't believe anyone would believe me," may hold emotional weight, but it is also a poor excuse for endangering 3 students. He trusts no one, not even Dumbledore, and so trust dies with his silence. Some might argue that Sirius needed the children to see the truth themselves, to witness Peter's transformation, to feel the betrayal, to understand viscerally what words alone could not express. But that's a dangerous gamble. What if Crookshanks had not intervened? What if Hermione had cast a spell first? What if Harry had killed him in self-defense? Sirius risked all of this for the sake of a dramatic moment. His theatrics could have cost him his life, and worse, the truth could have died with him. The irony, of course, is that Sirius later becomes the very model of candor. In Grimmauld Place, he talks freely, he mentors Harry, he shares stories, he is honest, even when honesty hurts. But in the shack, he is mute. That inconsistency begs explanation. The simplest one is that he didn't trust them yet, but that doesn't justify terrorizing them. The Sirius who laughs at his own, wanted posters and taunts Snape with sardonic wit could surely have found a better opening line than a growl and a knife. Another layer is the Marauder culture itself. These were boys who thrived on codes, pranks, and secrecy. They didn't ask for help. They didn't explain. They enacted. Perhaps Sirius believed that action would be enough, that dragging Peter into the light would vindicate him without a single word. But that belief shows just how out of sync he had become with reality. The world he left in Azkaban was not the one he returned to. And he forgot that truth, unspoken, is just another lie. The scene in the shack becomes a microcosm of Marauder philosophy, loyalty, vengeance, secrets, brotherhood, but it also highlights its flaws. By trusting only Remus and not trusting the children, Sirius exposes a dangerous blind spot. He believes that children should follow, not be informed. He forgets that Harry is not James, that Hermione is not Lily, that Ron is not Peter. They are their own people, and they deserved the truth. What is perhaps most tragic is that this moment stains Sirius's legacy. The man who could have been a father to Harry instead becomes a puzzle, a man whose every decision feels weighted with contradiction. He escapes to save Harry, but traumatizes him in the process. He wants justice, but uses fear. He wants connection, but chooses chaos. All of it leads back to that single question. Why didn't he just say something? Even Dumbledore, the great interpreter of chaos, doesn't fault Sirius for this decision, but we, the readers, should. Because narrative tension should not excuse irrational behavior. Sirius was smart, he was cunning, and he loved Harry, but he allowed emotion to override clarity. That is not a mark of insanity, it is a mark of pride. In the end, we are left with an unforgettable scene, yes, but also an unshakable doubt. What if Sirius had acted like a godfather instead of a ghost from the past? What if he had chosen compassion over spectacle? The Shrieking Shack could have been a place of truth. Instead, it became a stage, and Sirius, for all his pain, played the wrong role. The impact of that choice echoes far beyond the walls of the shack. Time-turners spin, Buckbeak flies, Snape seethes. And the truth, once finally spoken, is almost too late. Sirius nearly loses everything again. And for what? A dramatic pause? A look in Harry's eyes before the reveal? The cost of that moment cannot be overstated. Sirius's silence, in the end, is a choice. One born not from madness, but from a warped sense of control. In a world that had robbed him of power, he took control the only way he knew how, through mystery, through fear, through performance. But that control was a mirage, and it nearly cost him the only thing that mattered, a chance to be understood. Number 20, why didn't the Marauders adapt the map for the Order of the Phoenix? The Marauders map was the product of 4 of Hogwarts' most brilliant mischief makers, James Potter, Sirius Black, Remus Lupin, and Peter Pettigrew. Known to the school as Prongs, Padfoot, Moony, and Wormtail, they created this magical artifact to explore, exploit, and ultimately understand every hidden corner of Hogwarts. It was a masterstroke of youthful defiance and ingenuity, a rebellion etched in enchanted ink. But when the map is discovered years later by Fred and George Weasley in a drawer labelled confiscated and highly dangerous, it offers no guidance, no warning, no explanation. All it does is lie there, blank and silent, as if daring the finder to decipher its secrets. The boys eventually stumble upon the activation phrase, "I solemnly swear that I am up to no good," entirely by chance. It raises an uncomfortable question. Why didn't the Marauders leave instructions? The omission is strange, particularly considering the intelligence and forethought of the map's creators. These weren't careless pranksters. They were extraordinarily skilled. They managed to create a magical document that mapped not only every secret passage in Hogwarts, but also every moving soul within its walls, labelling even animagi and ghosts. They knew how to craft enchantments beyond their age, and yet they didn't think to include so much as a margin note, no invisible ink spell that could be revealed with the right charm, not even a cryptic poem scratched into the wood of their dormitory desk. Fred and George's discovery process was almost accidental. "This, Harry, is the secret of our success," George had told him in Harry Potter and The Prisoner of Azkaban. But success came with trial and error, not with instruction. They had to guess their way into the map's secrets. It's true that the phrase they used to activate it was poetic, mischievous, and very in character for the Marauders, but it was also impractical. The map wasn't meant to be intuitive. It demanded a particular mindset, a blend of cleverness and cheek, as though it would only yield itself to someone worthy. Yet what was the purpose of hiding something so extraordinary only to let it gather dust in Filch's office? The Marauders were not known for their discretion. They were daring, loud and proud. James and Sirius in particular thrived on attention, basked in the thrill of being known as troublemakers. Their creation of the map was in many ways an extension of their identity, so it feels inconsistent with their characters to have hidden it away so effectively. Unless they had a reason. Perhaps they didn't intend to pass it on at all. Perhaps, like the fireworks of a grand finale, the map was meant to serve its purpose and then disappear with them. But if that were true, why not destroy it? Why risk it falling into the hands of someone they wouldn't trust, like Severus Snape, or even the caretaking hands of Argus Filch? The question deepens when one considers how Sirius and Remus react when Harry shows them the map years later. Lupin is stunned. "Where did you get that?" he asks, clearly shaken. Sirius too is surprised, but not angry. There is no sense that either of them regrets the map's rediscovery. Rather, their reactions imply they believed the map was lost or forgotten, not hidden. So perhaps the Marauders did not intentionally abandon their creation. Perhaps its journey into the dark corners of Hogwarts was unplanned, the result of some hasty concealment during a moment of risk. If that's true, then the absence of instructions is not neglect but accident. Still, even that doesn't fully answer the mystery. The Marauders were methodical enough to enchant the map with passwords and protections. They even gave it the ability to insult its readers, as Snape discovers to his frustration when the map declares Mr. Mooney presents his compliments to Professor Snape and begs him to keep his abnormally large nose out of other people's business. This feature reveals that the map was prepared for future users, or at the very least, for the possibility of being discovered. Why prepare it to respond to outsiders with mockery, but not prepare it to welcome insiders with guidance? Maybe the Marauders believed the right person wouldn't need instructions. That only a true mischief maker, one with the same spark of rebellious curiosity they shared, would figure it out. That belief is romantic, but exclusionary. It assumes that their successors would think like them, joke like them, speak like them. It's elitist in its own whimsical way. What if the next finder had been someone like Neville Longbottom, brave, loyal, but far more straightforward? Would the map have remained dormant forever in his hands? This also leads to another question. Were the Marauders trying to protect the map? Instructions would make it more accessible, but also more vulnerable. In the wrong hands, the map could be used for surveillance, for cruelty, even for manipulation. Imagine if Draco Malfoy had access to such a tool. Imagine if it had fallen into Umbridge's grasp during her reign of terror. The Marauders may have left no instructions precisely to prevent misuse. To create a magical artifact that reveals every person's location at all times is a powerful and potentially dangerous thing. Perhaps their silence was their safeguard. Yet even that theory falters when we remember how the Weasley twins used the map. They never misused it, but they exploited it fully. They slipped past curfews, discovered hidden passages, and eventually passed the map on to Harry, trusting him implicitly. Harry, in turn, used it with discretion, but even he was tempted. In the Goblet of Fire, he considers watching Cedric and Cho Chang in the corridors. In the Half-Blood Prince, he uses it to spy on Draco. The map walks a fine line between help and harm, mischief and invasion. Remus Lupin, perhaps the most morally conscious of the four, does express some regret when he sees the map in Harry's possession. In Prisoner of Azkaban, he says, "You know how to work this?" And there is a pause, heavy with memory and possibly guilt. Lupin, who was often the conscience of the group, may have harbored doubts about the map's continued existence. Did he ever wish they had destroyed it, or left behind a warning? And what of Peter Pettigrew? The least remembered of the four in terms of moral legacy, yet an equal contributor to the map's magic. It was the map that first revealed his betrayal, as Scabbers, hiding in plain sight. The map could see through transformations, deceptions, and lies, but it didn't alert anyone. It didn't warn the user. The enchantment remained passive. Why? There is a bitter irony in the fact that the map, so carefully crafted by friends, remained silent when their friendship shattered. Did they ever consider altering it after Peter's betrayal? Did Sirius or Remus ever think to add an annotation, a danger sign, a red flag? Or had the map already slipped from their possession by the time that trust was broken? One might imagine a hidden compartment within the map, accessible only by those who truly understood its creators, a secret page revealing their intent, their regrets, or their wishes for its future. But there is nothing. Only footprints, names and paths. No context, no voice from the past. Dumbledore, with all his wisdom, never references the map directly. Yet it seems unlikely he was unaware of its existence. The Marauders were his students. He must have known of their nighttime wanderings, their sudden intimate knowledge of the castle. Did he choose to let it slide, believing they would learn responsibility through rebellion? Or did he quietly retrieve the map after James and Lily's deaths, only for it to be lost again during a confiscation? Even Snape, who loathed James with every fibre of his being, kept the map intact when he confiscated it from Harry. Why not destroy it? Was he unwilling to tamper with such powerful enchantments, or was it some remnant of respect, however begrudging, for the brilliance it represented? The truth is, the Marauders created a map more alive than they could have imagined. It outlived them. It witnessed betrayal, war, grief, and rebirth. It became an heirloom of sorts, not of bloodline, but of spirit. And yet it was left as a puzzle, a locked diary without a key. The silence of its creators is haunting. Perhaps that silence was the point. The Marauders thrived in mystery, in riddles, in games. To leave a trail would have been too easy, too mundane. They wanted to be discovered the way they lived, with wit, with risk, and with charm. Their legacy, encoded in magic and mischief, demands a seeker who is bold enough to try and clever enough to succeed. But that doesn't make the question any less valid. Why didn't they leave instructions? Why build something so magnificent and then bury it beneath layers of secrecy? Maybe because, in the end, they weren't ready to let it go. Maybe they wanted it to be found, but only by someone exactly like them. It's a romantic notion, but it's also selfish. Magic meant to be shared was hidden instead. A map meant to guide was silenced, and those who could have benefited, those who would have cherished the Marauders' legacy, had to stumble in the dark. All because no one thought to write. Start here. Number 21. Why wasn't Lupin monitored during full moons? Of all the secrets Hogwarts ever kept, perhaps none was as precariously balanced on the edge of danger as Remus Lupin's lycanthropy. It was a truth known to a select few, Dumbledore, Madame Pomfrey, and Severus Snape among them, but the secrecy surrounding it did not erase the reality of the risk. Each month, as the full moon rose, Lupin transformed into a werewolf, a creature of instinct and danger. The Wolfsbane potion, recently perfected by Snape himself, was his only anchor to sanity during these nights. But herein lies the uncomfortable question that few dare to ask. Why did no one ever confirm that he took it? It is easy to romanticize Lupin's return to Hogwarts as a triumph of trust over prejudice, the weary, kind-eyed professor who won students' hearts with practical lessons and quiet compassion. But trust, however noble, is a brittle defense when lives are at stake. The Wolfsbane potion had to be consumed daily for a week prior to the full moon, its bitterness a small price for the safety it promised. Yet there is no indication, no record, no routine check to ensure that each dose was taken. In a school full of children, this oversight is chilling. Snape, the very man who brewed the potion, despised Lupin's presence. He believed, as he once snapped at Harry, that Lupin had always been too close to Sirius Black, then a fugitive thought to be targeting Harry. It is ironic, then, that Snape, meticulous, suspicious Snape, never reported any refusal or deviation in the potion's usage. When he delivered it to Lupin's office, he simply left it there. Lupin confirms this in Prisoner of Azkaban. Severus has been very decent about it. He brews the potion for me every month. And yet, no further control. Why not demand he drink it in Snape's presence? Hogwarts had long embraced eccentricity, but the appointment of a werewolf as a professor stretched even Dumbledore's usual bounds of risk. The headmaster's faith in Lupin's character, while admirable, seems almost reckless when viewed through a practical lens. In the same book, Hermione deduces Lupin's secret with alarming ease. He's been ill once a month. He's friends with Black, and I've just found out what the boggart turned into. Oh, Harry, I'm right, aren't I? If a 14-year-old student could piece together the truth, should the faculty not have exercised more vigilance? The castle itself offered no safeguards during Lupin's transformation. He would slip away to the Shrieking Shack via the Wamping Willow, a route known only to a select few, and remain there until the morning. This plan, devised during Lupin's own school days, relied on his isolation to prevent harm. But isolation is not infallible. What if a student had followed him out of curiosity, as Harry did with Sirius Black? What if, for any reason, the Wolfsbane potion had not been taken? Consider the night of the final transformation in Prisoner of Azkaban, when Lupin forgets his potion altogether. "Tonight was the full moon," Lupin mutters with horror, moments before he begins to transform. Panic erupts. "You've got to get out of here," Lupin shouts, his body convulsing. In that moment, the absence of safeguards is brutally exposed. He had simply forgotten. Slip any human might make. But for a werewolf, it is not just a mistake. It is a catastrophe waiting to unfold. That night, it is pure chaos. Lupin transforms without his potion, loses control, and attacks indiscriminately. He bolts into the forbidden forest howling with rage. If not for Sirius Black, in animagus form as Padfoot, intervening and holding Lupin at bay, there might have been bloodshed. And even then, Harry and Hermione were left alone, unprotected in the woods, prey to whatever danger lurked nearby. The glaring absence of any safety protocol was never questioned. Madame Pomfrey, who had faithfully attended to Lupin during his student years, should have been the first to notice the lack of supervision. She had once escorted him to the Wamping Willow monthly, ensuring he reached the Shrieking Shack undisturbed. Now, as a professor, he made the trip alone, not even a confirmation that he had his potion with him. How did the school nurse, whose duty it was to protect the health of students and staff, accept such a risk? Dumbledore's blind spot is another uncomfortable truth. His compassion had always guided him, but sometimes at the cost of clarity. In defending Lupin's position, he seemed to forget that Hogwarts was not a sanctuary but a school. "I trust Remus Lupin," he told the staff, Edith, and perhaps himself, time and again, but trust is not a safeguard. It is not a protocol, and it certainly is not an excuse when something goes wrong. Even Severus Snape, whose bitterness made him ever ready to accuse, never took the logical step of requiring a witness to the potion's consumption. When Lupin resigns at the end of the third book, it is not because he harmed anyone, but because Snape let slip the truth. "Parents will not want someone like me teaching their children," Lupin says, with a kind of sad acceptance. But the real question is not who taught the students. The real question is what would have happened if Snape had revealed the truth after a tragedy, not before. There is precedent in the books for obsessive over-safety. After the Chamber of Secrets was opened, the school hired Gilderoy Lockhart, A fraud, yes, but still proof that Dumbledore and the governors were willing to take bold risks to protect the students. Prefects patrolled hallways, students were escorted to classes, yet none of these measures existed for the monthly hazard of Lupin's condition. Why? If the Ministry of Magic had known that a werewolf was teaching children, and that no one monitored his potion, there would have been uproar. Dolores Umbridge's later reign at Hogwarts, complete with blood quills and inspection squads, was driven in part by this legacy of perceived negligence. The Ministry believed that Dumbledore acted without oversight. In this case, it would have been correct. The Marauders themselves, Sirius Black, James Potter, Peter Pettigrew, and Lupin, had always played with danger. As teenagers, they became illegal animagi, not to protect Lupin, but to join him in his transformations. They embraced the chaos of it, naming themselves Padfoot, Prongs, Wormtail, and Moony. But adult life demands accountability. The same whimsy that defined their youth had no place in the halls of a school where children trusted blindly in adult protection. The Wolfsbane potion was a gift of science. Developed only in recent years, it offered what had never before existed, a way to defang the beast without killing the man. But like any medication, it only worked if taken properly, and no one, not Snape, not Pomfrey, not Dumbledore, made sure of that. Why was it not policy? A simple system. Snape delivers the potion, Lupin drinks it under supervision, Pomfrey logs the date. It would have taken minutes. It could have saved lives. This is not a hypothetical concern. Had Peter Pettigrew not escaped that night in the Shrieking Shack, Lupin's transformation could have ended with the death of a child. Had Harry and Hermione not hidden behind the trees, had Black not been animagus, had Hagrid's hut not been near enough for the werewolf to flee into the woods, there would have been blood on the floor of that classroom. When Lupin leaves Hogwarts, it is not in disgrace but in sorrow. He knows he is a liability. "I've resigned. It seems that someone has let slip that I am a werewolf," he says. The tragedy is that he should not have had to resign. He was an extraordinary teacher. But he should never have been left alone with such a burden. Systems should have supported him, not just trust. And yet, in the end, it is all memory. Lupin's year at Hogwarts remains a beautiful but fragile echo of what could have been, a chance at normalcy that crumbled under the weight of one forgotten potion. A lesson perhaps not in fear of the other, but in the limits of unchecked faith. If the wizarding world ever hopes to move beyond prejudice, it must begin by treating dangers with care, not with silence. Lupin deserved dignity, and the students deserved safety. These things are not opposites, they are partners. But only when someone dares to ask the uncomfortable question. Number 22. Why didn't Dumbledore tell Harry who Lupin was from the start? Remus Lupin stepped into the Hogwarts Express like a shadow from another life, slumped and sleeping in a tattered cloak. Harry, Ron, and Hermione had no idea who he was. To them, he was a stranger, a shabby, dozing adult with grey threads at his temples and exhaustion carved into his face. Yet for Albus Dumbledore, this man was no mystery. He was Remus John Lupin, a former student, a trusted ally, a member of the original Order of the Phoenix, and above all, one of James Potter's closest friends. And yet, despite this, Dumbledore offered Harry no warning, no hint, no context. He allowed the boy to encounter Lupin cold, without the warmth of recognition or the possibility of connection. The first defense against the dark arts class with Professor Lupin should have been a moment of emotional revelation for Harry. The chance to meet someone who had known his parents intimately, who could recount laughter in Gryffindor Tower or pranks on the Quidditch pitch. But instead the connection was muted, buried under layers of secrecy. Lupin did not reveal himself as a marauder, nor as a friend of James and Lily. Dumbledore said nothing. Harry was left once again to stumble toward the truth on his own. Professor Lupin looked particularly shabby. His robes were patched and frayed, the text says, and that observation lingered in Harry's mind far more than any emotional bond. There's an undeniable pattern in how Dumbledore manages the truth. He holds it close like a powerful charm he's not yet ready to cast. With Lupin, this silence is all the more striking because it concerns Harry's identity, his past, his parents, his legacy. Dumbledore, who had taken such pains to ensure Harry grew up away from the fame of the wizarding world, now had the opportunity to let someone into Harry's life who could bridge the aching gap between myth and memory. But he chose silence, as he so often did. What makes the situation uncomfortable is the timing. This was Harry's third year, a year riddled with fear and confusion. The wizarding world believed Sirius Black was hunting him. Dementors were stationed around the school. Whispers followed Harry through the corridors. And in the middle of it all, Dumbledore allowed a marauder, someone intricately linked to James, Sirius, and Peter Pettigrew, to quietly slip into Harry's orbit without any frame of reference. It feels like a cruel omission when weighed against the comfort such knowledge could have brought. The Marauders weren't just school friends, they were brothers in arms, bound by years of mischief, loyalty, and pain. Lupin was part of the very fabric of Harry's lost family. He had known Harry as a baby. He had fought alongside James and Lily. He could have shared memories that weren't tainted by newspaper headlines or whispered legends. But Harry didn't know that. To him, Lupin was just another teacher. A good one, yes, but still a stranger. Dumbledore had in other circumstances shown great empathy in preparing Harry emotionally. He had spoken gently to him about his mother's love. He had made sure the mirror of Erised was moved to prevent Harry from losing himself in the past. He had guided Harry toward maturity with carefully measured lessons. Why, then, did he abandon this instinct when it came to Lupin? There is something almost theatrical in Dumbledore's silences, as if he prefers a dramatic reveal to a heartfelt moment of clarity. In this case, that meant sacrificing emotional warmth for narrative suspense. Harry only learns about the Marauders' true identities near the climax of The Prisoner of Azkaban, in the shrieking shack, amidst betrayal, violence, and ghosts of the past returning in terrifying ways. It's there that he hears Lupin say, "I haven't been helping Sirius. If you'd been listening to me, Harry, you'd have heard, he's not been trying to kill you, he's been trying to kill Peter Pettigrew." By then, the emotional stakes are too high for reflection. Had Dumbledore told Harry earlier? Had he simply said, "This is Remus Lupin, a friend of your father's," the emotional terrain might have shifted. Harry might have confided in Lupin sooner. He might have asked questions about James, about the Marauders, about the night his parents died. And perhaps with that trust, the truth about the Marauders' map, about Sirius, and even Peter Pettigrew might have surfaced earlier, and with less trauma. But instead, Dumbledore allowed the clock to tick ominously toward revelation through confrontation. One might argue that Dumbledore trusted Lupin to reveal himself in his own time, but Lupin was deeply self-conscious about his condition. He was a man living in shame, used to hiding in plain sight. His lycanthropy defined his choices. As much as he cared for Harry, he was not going to risk his position or the boy's trust by speaking too soon. It was a cruel burden to place on Lupin, to expect him to both teach and confess. Dumbledore knew better. Even Severus Snape, who loathed Lupin, seemed to grasp the danger of secrets. When he snarled about Lupin's condition, it wasn't just spite. It was the revelation of something that Dumbledore had chosen to withhold. Again. The result? Students panicked, parents demanded answers, and Harry was once more left wondering why the adults in his life withheld the truth until it boiled over into scandal. Lupin's resignation is one of the most tragic moments in The Prisoner of Azkaban. "Parents will not want a werewolf teaching their children," he says with quiet resignation. But the deeper tragedy lies in what was never said. He never got to be, in Harry's eyes, the gentle uncle figure he could have been. He was never fully embraced as someone who had once stood beside James Potter under the same Gryffindor banner. That potential relationship, that healing thread between past and present, was lost in the fog of secrets. What stands out is Dumbledore's almost obsessive need to manipulate outcomes. He allowed Lupin into the castle, knowing full well his connection to Harry, knowing full well his tragic past. Yet he orchestrated nothing to facilitate understanding between them. No conversation, no private meeting, no gentle prodding, just silence, and the assumption that it would all unfold correctly. This behavior mirrors Dumbledore's other choices, not telling Harry about the prophecy until Order of the Phoenix, not explaining the truth about Horcruxes until the final hour, and not revealing his own regrets until after his death through the pensieve. In all things Dumbledore holds back. He curates knowledge like a collector, waiting for the perfect moment to display it, even if that moment is too late. Harry himself grows wary of this manipulation. In Order of the Phoenix, he confronts Dumbledore and accuses him of using him like a pawn. "You don't care," he shouts. "You don't care what I'm feeling." That sentiment applies just as much to the events of third year. Dumbledore, in trying to protect Harry from too much too soon, denied him the truth that could have strengthened him. It is a haunting irony that Harry must learn about his parents' past from enemies or in moments of crisis. Snape's memories, Sirius's confessions, the Shrieking Shack showdown, these are the fragments that form his understanding of James and Lily. Lupin could have been a guiding light through that maze. But Dumbledore let that candle flicker in silence. Lupin's presence during the Dementor attack on the train was a missed opportunity too. He protected Harry, an act that went beyond professional duty. He gave him chocolate, yes, but also comfort. It was one of the few moments when an adult truly cared for Harry without pretense. Had Harry known the history behind that compassion, the moment would have meant even more. Instead, it remained a small kindness from a stranger. Harry's later affection for Lupin proves how valuable that relationship could have been. In Order of the Phoenix, when Lupin joins the rescue at the Ministry, Harry feels something like relief. Here is someone who knows, someone who remembers, and yet that bond is always bittersweet, always shadowed by the fact that their connection was delayed, distorted by omissions that should never have existed. One could even argue that the delay in trust allowed other dangers to creep closer. Had Lupin been a figure of emotional authority earlier, perhaps Harry wouldn't have relied so heavily on the Marauders map without questioning its origins. Perhaps he would have asked why it called Peter Pettigrew alive. But that door to knowledge had not been opened. Dumbledore's silence also allowed resentment to grow in others. Snape's hatred for Lupin was never tempered by public trust or transparency. The staff at Hogwarts never had the chance to unite around Lupin because his full story was hidden. Again, Dumbledore favoured mystery over harmony, and again, Harry paid the emotional price. In the end, the Marauders' legacy was a tangle of secrets, and Dumbledore, who had once watched 4 teenage boys gallop across the grounds in animagus form, chose not to untangle it. He let the silence sit like fog over a memory that should have been luminous. He let Lupin arrive, unannounced. He let Harry wonder, and by the time the truth came out, it was too late for comfort. Only revelation remained. Had Harry known who Lupin was from the beginning, he might have seen the third year not only as the year of danger and betrayal, but as the year he reclaimed a piece of his father. A year when someone who had loved James Potter could have offered stories, guidance, even affection. But Dumbledore, ever the puppeteer, ever the enigma, kept that gift tucked away. And so Harry met a friend of his father in darkness instead of light. Number 20. Why didn't the Marauders stop Sirius from endangering Snape? The Wamping Willow stood in silence, guarding the entrance to the shrieking shack like an ancient sentinel. On that fateful night, it concealed more than a monster. It hid a moment of pure betrayal. The Marauders, James Potter, Sirius Black, Remus Lupin, and Peter Pettigrew, had built a legend around their friendship, a myth of mischief and loyalty, but under the surface of laughter and animal transformations lay something darker. When Sirius told Severus Snape how to reach the shrieking shack during a full moon, it was not just a prank, it was a calculated act that almost ended in blood. That night remains one of the most disturbing questions in the legacy of the Marauders. Why didn't they stop it? Sirius's decision to reveal Lupin's secret to Snape wasn't impulsive. According to Remus Lupin himself, in The Prisoner of Azkaban, the act was deliberate. Sirius thought it would be amusing to tell Snape all he had to do was prod the knot on the tree trunk with a long stick, and he'd be able to get in. This wasn't idle gossip. It was a deliberate attempt to put Snape in mortal danger. Sirius Black, ever the tempestuous and charismatic rebel, wasn't oblivious to the danger. He knew what Lupin became each full moon. That raises the uncomfortable question, was it really a prank, or was it an attempted murder dressed up as a joke? And what about the others? Lupin, for one, knew about the animagus transformations. The other Marauders had been sneaking into the shrieking shack for years to accompany him. He must have known how dangerous he became under the full moon. Why didn't he suspect that Snape might someday discover the truth? Or did he already know Sirius had loose lips and chose to remain silent, fearing the collapse of their brotherhood? Lupin, in Order of the Phoenix, admits to Harry that he had suspicions about the way Sirius sometimes treated Snape, saying, "I sometimes got the impression that Sirius thought it was funny to go too far." Yet he said nothing, even as danger grew. There's something deeply unsettling about the fact that James was the only one who acted to save Snape. As Lupin recalls, James pulled him back, at great risk to his own life. Why was James the only one? Why not Peter Pettigrew, who was always nearby, always eager to follow Sirius's lead? Peter's silence may be expected. His cowardice is a familiar stain on the Marauders' legacy. But James and Lupin? Their silence until the very last moment shows a lack of urgency, a troubling level of complicity. Were they truly unaware of Sirius's plan, or did they just not believe he'd go through with it? The dynamic within the Marauders is often remembered as one of unity and brotherhood, but this event cracks that image open. It shows a relationship where power imbalances, cruelty, and moral apathy were not only present, but tolerated. Sirius, who came from a dark and oppressive home, carried a kind of fury inside him. He channeled it into pranks, rebellion, and a hatred for anyone who reminded him of his family, especially Snape. That hatred burned so hot that he weaponized his knowledge of Lupin's condition, using it to put another student at mortal risk. And that isn't a joke, it's a vengeful act. What remains particularly disturbing is that the only reason Snape survived was James. And James's motivation wasn't entirely noble. He didn't save Snape out of pure morality. As Snape bitterly notes in Deathly Hallows, he only did it to stop me telling everyone that Lupin was a werewolf. This casts a shadow over James's so-called heroism. It suggests that even his actions were tangled in self-interest, damage control, rather than true repentance. Snape was a victim of a game he never agreed to play, surrounded by enemies in the guise of schoolboys. That the Marauders never seemed to reflect publicly on this moment is telling. In all the glimpses we get of their youth, through pensive memories, tales from Remus, or whispers from Sirius, this event is mentioned only in passing. It's not a lesson learned, but a skeleton buried deep in the closet. The fact that Lupin tells Harry about it years later, only under pressure, indicates the extent to which it remained unspoken among them. The lack of remorse from Sirius, even in Order of the Phoenix, when confronted with the darker sides of his past, is perhaps the most chilling detail. He waves it away, saying, "We were young, foolish, we made mistakes," as though that could erase a death sentence masked as a prank. Even Dumbledore's handling of the situation is shrouded in secrecy. Snape, after being sworn to silence by Dumbledore, was never allowed to speak of the incident. Lupin himself acknowledges this in Prisoner of Azkaban, saying, "Dumbledore made him swear never to tell anyone what he'd found." This imposed silence protected Lupin, yes, but it also protected the Marauders. The absence of consequences speaks volumes. The incident was erased, sanitized, no expulsions, no disciplinary action, just a boy nearly mauled to death carrying a grudge and a scar invisible to most. That grudge would echo for decades. It's no exaggeration to say this event contributed to the man Snape became. The bitterness, the loathing, the obsession with justice, however cruel. It's often said that Snape was a bully, but where did that begin? Imagine being 16, lured into a trap by your enemies, almost killed, then silenced by the very authority figures who should protect you. The Marauders escaped unscathed. Snape was left with fear, shame, and the knowledge that no one cared enough to stop it. Even Harry's view of the Marauders, shaped by tales of friendship and adventure, begins to crack when he witnesses their cruelty firsthand in Snape's worst memory. In Order of the Phoenix, he sees James levitating Snape upside down, humiliated in front of a crowd, while Sirius lounges nearby, smirking. "You think it's funny?" Harry asks Sirius later. The silence that follows is deafening. The truth is, their brand of heroism was always conditional, always tinged with arrogance. Remus Lupin, perhaps the most morally grounded of them all, carries guilt. In Deathly Hallows, he breaks down, saying he considered himself a coward. Not just for fleeing Tonks or his child, but perhaps for all the times he stood by and watched his friends take things too far. His silence in the Shrieking Shack incident isn't just passive, it's a form of betrayal. He knew Sirius, he knew Snape, and he said nothing. That silence nearly killed a boy. It's tempting to paint the Marauders as victims of their youth, but this excuse wears thin. At Hogwarts, they were revered, they were powerful, they had knowledge, secrets, and a bond stronger than most adults could comprehend. That they used that power not just to protect their friend Remus, but to weaponize his condition, speaks to a deeper corruption. It was not ignorance that led to that night. It was a mix of cruelty, ego, and unchecked camaraderie. And where was Peter Pettigrew? Always in the background, always nodding along. His presence in the Marauders' story is often minimized, but perhaps he was their mirror, the coward who reflected their worst traits. He never stopped Sirius. He never stood up to James. He was a spectator to their reign and perhaps even an eager accomplice. When he finally betrayed James and Lily, it wasn't a transformation, it was a culmination. The Marauders' story is often remembered as golden, a tale of friendship and resistance. But moments like the Shrieking Shack incident remind us that even in legends, shadows fall. Sirius Black never apologized. He never expressed regret, not in words, not in tone. Even when he told Harry, "Your father would have done the same for me," he wasn't talking about saving Snape. He was talking about war, the war where enemies die and friends survive. Snape, in his eyes, was always the enemy. What makes this memory so powerful is how it reshapes everything. It forces readers to question what bravery means. Is bravery pulling someone back from the edge, or never letting them be pushed in the first place? James was brave, yes, but his bravery was reactive. Sirius's act was premeditated. Lupin's silence was passive. Pettigrew's was cowardly. In that single event, the Marauders' myth collapses. Years later, Snape would join Voldemort. And some might wonder, how could he? But perhaps the real question is, after everything Hogwarts gave him, what reason did he have to stay loyal to it? The people who nearly killed him became heroes. The man who tried to protect him, Dumbledore, used him for his own ends. Even Lily, his only friend, turned away. The night Sirius pointed him toward the shack wasn't the first betrayal, but it may have been the last straw. In the end, it is not just Snape who carries the consequences. The Marauders, dead or disgraced, left behind a legacy built on loyalty and loss, but inside that legacy lies a question with no easy answer. Why didn't they stop it? Why did they let it go so far? And why, after everything, did they never truly say we were wrong? The Wamping Willow still stands, silent and unmoved, but for those who know what happened there, it remains more than a tree. It's a witness to the darkest joke the Marauders ever told, and no matter how charming their memories may seem, that night will always cast a shadow. Number 24. Why didn't Pettigrew run away earlier? In the flickering candlelight of the Gryffindor common room, long after curfew, the map had once again been unfolded. It was Harry who stared at it, brow furrowed, fingers tracing the moving dots labelled with names. Peter Pettigrew, it read, a name that should have been buried, a ghost of war long thought dead. Yet there it was, night after night, scuttling beside Ron Weasley's name. What Harry saw that evening shattered assumptions and triggered a revelation with the power to rewrite the past. But what remains unsettling is not only what Harry discovered, but what Peter Pettigrew failed to anticipate. Pettigrew had been a rat for 12 long years, hiding in plain sight. A coward's choice, yes, but a brilliant one in its way. He clung to the form of a common animal, deceiving even the most watchful eyes. But how did he not foresee that the very invention he helped create could be his undoing? The Marauders map, the greatest feat of magical cartography Hogwarts had ever seen, was not a forgotten relic. Surely Peter must have known that if it survived, and it did, it would expose him. Still he remained in the castle, tucked away in the pocket of a schoolboy, in the heart of danger. Why? The map knew no deceit. It displayed every soul, living and breathing within Hogwarts grounds, from Argus Filch to nearly Headless Nick. Names flickered across its parchment surface like stars in motion, and names could not be disguised by animagus forms. That's what made the map extraordinary and damning, because although Peter had transformed his body, his name remained unchanged. That alone renders his failure to flee more than strange. It borders on the incomprehensible. Some might claim ignorance. That Peter didn't know the map had resurfaced after all. The object had disappeared for years, confiscated by Filch, and locked away in his drawer of misbehaving magical items. But Peter was no ordinary wizard. He was a marauder. He had helped make it. Along with James, Sirius, and Remus, he had enchanted every hallway and staircase. He had watched ink and charm combine to reveal a breathing castle on paper. He would have known the map was unique, and he would have known that its rediscovery was inevitable. Pettigrew's behavior in the third book reveals not the cunning of a cornered man, but the dangerous confidence of someone who believed himself forgotten. "He's a rat!" Ron had cried in The Prisoner of Azkaban, defending his pet Scabbers. And for years Peter had remained just that, a companion, a squeaking presence, feeding on crumbs and comfort. No one questioned the rat with the missing toe. Even the Weasley family, with all their magical awareness, failed to see beyond the surface. This oblivion gave Peter a sense of safety so profound that it dulled his sense of danger. Perhaps that was his first mistake. And yet, the moment the map found its way into Fred and George's possession, and later to Harry, his secret was no longer safe. The twins, mischievous as they were, had no reason to search for rats or ghosts of the past, but Harry, curious and tied to a mystery deeper than he knew, looked closer. It was in those moments, alone with the parchment, that the truth unravelled. But what of Peter? Did he ever catch sight of the map again? Did he fear its power, or had he grown so accustomed to his safety that the thought never occurred? It is plausible to assume that Peter underestimated his old friends. Not their power, but their memories. He may have assumed the map lost, or at worst, unreadable by those who didn't understand its secrets. But again, he had seen what Harry had not. The map required only the right words. "I solemnly swear that I am up to no good." Such a phrase was not so obscure. It echoed their youth. It bore the rhythm of Sirius's laughter and James's pranks. Would Peter not suspect that such a key could be discovered again? And if he did suspect, why didn't he act? The corridors of Hogwarts offered no real prison for a creature like him. He could escape through pipes, under doors, between shadows. He had fled the Dark Lord himself once. Why remain in the one place where his true identity could be read on a magical document by any curious student? Perhaps the answer lies in pride, or perhaps in fear. Peter had always been the weakest of the four. Even Sirius, in his fury, had once screamed, he was their spy. For all his deception, Peter lacked the steel to act boldly. Escaping Hogwarts would have required planning. It would have required him to think like Sirius, with decisiveness and nerve. But Peter was not Sirius. He was a man of delay, of waiting for others to make the first move. His failure to act was not simply ignorance, but paralysis. We must also consider the question of transformation. Could Peter have disguised his name? Perhaps if he had access to Polyjuice Potion, or to more obscure magical concealments. But as a rat, his resources were limited. Even if he retained his wand, and he didn't, he could not cast spells in animagious form. He was powerless, except for what his shape provided, stealth. And perhaps that, in his mind, was enough. Still, his dependence on that shape was a gamble. Animagus registration existed for a reason, though Peter never registered. His form was a secret shared only among the Marauders, yet even unregistered, his name betrayed him. It was this magical oversight and the fact that animagi appear on the map that made his downfall not just possible, but certain. He knew the map did this. He had to know. So again, why stay? Maybe he thought no one would look. Maybe he thought the map would never fall into the hands of someone who knew his name. James was dead. Sirius was in Azkaban. Remus was absent from Hogwarts for 12 years, and Harry? Just a boy. A boy who never knew Peter in life. A boy who never heard the name until it was nearly too late. Peter bet everything on anonymity. It worked. Until it didn't. There's also the irony of who discovered him. Not a teacher, not Dumbledore, not even Remus, but Harry, the son of the man he betrayed, the godson of the friend he framed. It was Harry's curiosity, not vengeance, that unraveled the web. And that makes Peter's inaction even more absurd. He was not found through targeted pursuit. He was not hunted. He was stumbled upon. The Marauders' map, like a dormant curse, simply awakened. This raises a disturbing possibility that Peter was so used to hiding that he forgot what it meant to be seen. The map wasn't just a piece of paper, it was memory inked into magic, a spell that remembered what Peter had hoped to erase, a name he could not bury, a reflection of guilt that moved even while he remained silent. And perhaps Peter knew all along, and simply hoped it would never fall into the right hands. We cannot ignore the bitter poetry in the fact that the tool created for mischief was the same tool that exposed a murderer. The map had always been a game, a way to escape curfew, to avoid Filch, to find secret corridors. But it also bore witness to truth. It was loyal not to justice, but to fact. And in doing so, it betrayed the very marauder who helped create it. It's also worth noting that Peter's presence was never questioned until the moment Ron's rat disappeared. "Scabbers is missing," Ron had said in panic. The timing of that disappearance coincided precisely with the return of Sirius Black. Peter knew his time had come. He knew that Sirius had escaped, not to kill Harry, but to find him. And so Peter ran. But by then, It was too late. His name had already spoken. The Marauders' map did not lie, and Peter's gamble had expired. If he had fled earlier, before Fred and George gifted the map to Harry, he might have lived longer in comfort. Perhaps even avoided detection entirely. But he waited too long. The boy who carried his secret also carried his fate. Peter's story then becomes a parable of pride wrapped in fear. A man who trusted too much in his disguise and too little in the memory of magic. A coward who lived among children because he thought children could never harm him. But it was a child who saw what others did not. It was a child who unfolded the map, read the name, and began to understand. And so Peter's great failure was not betrayal, though that was monstrous enough, but blindness. A blindness to the durability of magic. A blindness to the legacy of names. He underestimated not only the map, but the will of a boy determined to understand the world left behind by his parents. Had he escaped sooner, perhaps he could have vanished into history, another forgotten thread. But he stayed, and that decision, quiet and cowardly, sealed his end, not with a battle, but with ink, not with a duel, but with a name that refused to disappear. Number 25. Why did Dumbledore hire a werewolf to teach defense? Of all the mysteries that surround Albus Dumbledore's decisions during his tenure at Hogwarts, one in particular continues to provoke debate even years after the war has ended. Why did he appoint Remus Lupin, a known werewolf, to teach defense against the dark arts in Harry's third year? This was not just a curious staffing decision, it was a gamble with terrifying stakes. The boy who lived was returning for another year, increasingly targeted by Lord Voldemort's loyal followers. Hogwarts, the last sanctuary, needed unwavering strength and impeccable judgment in every corner. And yet the man Dumbledore chose, though kind, brilliant, and wise, carried within him a deeply unpredictable curse. Remus Lupin was a tragic figure long before he set foot in the Hogwarts classroom as a professor. Bitten as a child by Fenrir Greyback, he lived a life of fear and rejection, carefully managing his transformations with the help of the Wolfsbane potion provided by the very man who once served Voldemort, Severus Snape. Even with the potion, the transformation was excruciating, and the human part of him was barely present during the nights of the full moon. The Wolfsbane only subdued his madness. It did not eliminate the monster. Dumbledore knew this, and still he invited him to teach. During that year, Lupin proved to be an exceptional teacher. He taught students how to defend themselves, not just theoretically, but practically. He showed Neville Longbottom how to defeat a boggart. He gave Harry his first real defense against Dementors. "You have been taught how to produce a Patronus charm?" Cornelius Fudge would later ask, astounded. Few third years could claim such a feat. Lupin's lessons had real weight. His empathy and intelligence filled a void that other professors had left untouched. But should these virtues have outweighed the risks? The risks were far from abstract. The students never knew just how close they came to danger. The school grounds were open. The shrieking shack, once used to conceal Lupin's transformations, was still there, but access to it had grown far easier with time. The Wamping Willow could be subdued with a simple knot at its base. What if a curious student had stumbled in during one of Lupin's transformations? What if the Wolfsbane potion failed? And what if Severus Snape, fueled by old grudges and bitterness, had decided not to brew it? Hogwarts would have been one scream away from catastrophe. Snape never trusted Lupin's presence at the school. It's telling that he accidentally let it slip that Lupin was a werewolf, an action that led to Remus's resignation. Some saw this as petty revenge, but was it also a warning cry that had gone unheard for too long? Snape, for all his faults, had a sense for danger. He knew the fragility of Dumbledore's arrangements. He knew that sentimentality was no armor. Lupin's heart was noble, yes, but it beat within the chest of a beast. Dumbledore's motivations likely ran deeper than kindness. There is every indication that he sought to redeem Lupin publicly, to show the wizarding world that a werewolf could be trusted, loved, even respected. This, after all, was Dumbledore's way, to believe in second chances, in the complexity of souls, in the worth of the misunderstood. He did it with Snape, with Hagrid, even with Draco Malfoy. But was this the right time for such an experiment? When Sirius Black was believed to be hunting Harry, when Dementors roamed the perimeters of the school, when paranoia, fear and loyalty were constantly in flux. And then there was Harry, the boy with the lightning scar. He bonded with Lupin immediately, sensing a familiarity, a missing piece of his father's legacy. Lupin shared stories of James Potter, offered compassion when few others did, and taught him the Patronus charm, the single most important spell Harry would use that year. Lupin gave Harry strength, he gave him memory, but in doing so, Dumbledore unknowingly added another layer of vulnerability. Harry's trust in Lupin was complete. If Lupin had ever lost control, it wouldn't just have been physical danger, it would have been emotional devastation. The truth is, even under the best conditions, werewolf transformations are not entirely predictable. In The Prisoner of Azkaban, the wolfsbane potion was brewed meticulously by Snape. Yet the night Sirius and Peter were revealed, Lupin forgot to take it. "I had not taken my potion," he would later admit, voice heavy with regret. That moment alone put every soul in the shrieking shack at risk. He transformed into a feral beast, and it was only sheer luck and Sirius's intervention as Padfoot that prevented tragedy. What if that transformation had occurred in the castle? Would Dumbledore have accepted responsibility if a student died that night? The old headmaster was famous for keeping secrets and offering cryptic explanations. "Sometimes we must choose between what is right and what is easy," he once said. But in this case, the easy path would have been hiring any number of qualified witches or wizards. He didn't. He chose a werewolf. Why? Perhaps it goes back to the Marauders. Dumbledore knew who Lupin had once been, a loyal friend in a time of betrayal, a steady mind among reckless ones. Of the four, he had never strayed. James died, Sirius was imprisoned, Peter vanished into shadow. Only Lupin remained. Was this Dumbledore's way of restoring a balance broken since Voldemort's first rise? Did he see Lupin not just as a teacher but as a piece of history that needed mending? There's also the matter of stigma. Werewolves in the wizarding world are feared and marginalized. Their rights are limited. Employment is nearly impossible. Lupin's appointment was revolutionary, even radical. It was a silent statement that Hogwarts would not participate in prejudice, but statements come with costs. Were Dumbledore's ideals worth endangering children? The question echoes unresolved. And yet Lupin's presence created profound transformations in his students. Hermione Granger respected him instantly. Even Draco Malfoy, who later mocked him, admitted he was a competent teacher. Defense against the dark arts, so often a rotating door of mediocrity and madness, finally had substance. Lupin's curriculum was practical, compassionate, and tailored to real fear, not theory. He brought the subject alive. Still, the year ended in scandal. Lupin was exposed and forced to resign. Parents were outraged. The ministry nodded in disapproval, and Dumbledore, he simply said, "It is not what someone is born, but what they grow to be." It was noble, of course, but it did not answer the uncomfortable question. Had his idealism blinded him to the real threat? The truth is, Dumbledore operated with a philosophy of controlled chaos. He trusted in people's better nature, sometimes to a fault. He trusted Snape. He trusted Draco. He even trusted Tom Riddle once. These trusts were not always rewarded. In Lupin's case, perhaps he trusted the system more than the man. He believed in the wolfsbane potion, in Snape's cooperation, in the precautions set around the shrieking shack. But all of these systems had cracks. Dumbledore's relationship with risk was philosophical. He believed in calculated gambles. Lupin's appointment was one such gamble. He saw the bigger picture, the idea that change comes not from safety but from bravery. But bravery doesn't always equal wisdom. And when a school houses hundreds of young, curious, impulsive minds, the line between bravery and recklessness thins dangerously. It's easy, in hindsight, to romanticize Lupin's year at Hogwarts. He was gentle, wise, and brave. He brought warmth to the cold walls of the defense classroom. But there's an alternate timeline, one where a transformation goes wrong, where a student is bitten, where Lupin never forgives himself. That timeline was one accident away from becoming real, and Dumbledore knew it. There's an irony to the Marauders' legacy. James Potter died a hero. Sirius Black was hunted as a villain, Peter Pettigrew hid as a rat, and Remus Lupin, the most stable among them, was the one burdened with the most dangerous secret. The other three were extreme in their own ways, reckless, deceptive, brave to a fault. Lupin was balanced. That balance may have been exactly what Dumbledore wanted to place before Harry, but did he consider the weight Lupin had to carry? During the climax of The Prisoner of Azkaban, as the full moon rises, Lupin loses control. He doesn't attack thanks only to Sirius in his animagus form. But imagine if Sirius hadn't been there. Imagine if Peter had used the moment for violence. The margin for disaster was paper thin. That night should have been a wake-up call. But Dumbledore simply moved forward, as he always did, carrying secrets like lanterns through the fog. Ultimately, the question is not whether Lupin deserved the job. He did. The question is whether it was right to place the burden of redemption on the backs of children. Was it fair to turn Hogwarts into an experiment in social acceptance when the consequences could have been deadly? Dumbledore's faith in human nature was beautiful, but faith, unchecked by caution, can be a dangerous thing. Lupin's resignation was heartbreaking, and Harry's reaction even more so. "But you're the best defense teacher we've ever had," he protested. Lupin smiled, weary. "Perhaps," he said, "but it would be too risky to remain." The truth finally caught up with the ideal. The risk had always been there, quiet, patient, waiting. Dumbledore had rolled the dice. They landed in his favor, but just barely.